Damien Lancaster stood at his office window, looking down at the city lights below. His hands were in the pockets of his expensive suit, but money couldn't fix the emptiness he felt inside. At 45 years old, he had everything money could. Buys a penthouse apartment, fancy cars, and more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. But he was alone. His secretary Nancy knocked on the door. "Mr. Lancaster, the board meeting starts in 5 minutes. "Thank you, Nancy," he said, not turning around. Another meeting, another deal, another few $1 million. What was it all for? The meeting dragged on as usual. Damien barely listened as his executives talked about profit margins and market shares. His mind kept drifting to the argument he'd had with his mother that morning. "When are you going to settle down?" she had asked over their weekly breakfast. "You need someone in your life, Damien. All that money won't keep you warm at night." He had brushed her off like he always did. Love was for other people, weaker people. He had built Lancaster Industries from nothing, and he didn't need anyone else. The meeting finally ended at 9 p.m. Damien gathered his things, said goodnight to Nancy, and headed for the parking garage. The November air was bitter cold. He pulled his coat tighter as he walked to his car. That's when he heard it. A small sound like a whimper. He would have missed it if a truck hadn't backfired nearby, making him pause. There it was again, coming from the alley beside his building. Damien knew he should just get in his car and go home. This was New York City, after all. But something made him walk toward the sound. At first he saw nothing but trash cans and cardboard boxes. Then one of the boxes moved. A tiny face peeked out, eyes wide with fear. It was a little girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old. Her clothes were dirty and torn. Her dark hair was matted, and her face was smudged with dirt. "Hey there," Damien said softly, crouching down. "Are you okay?" The girl shrunk back into her box. "I won't hurt you," he said. "My name is Damien. What's yours?" For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Lily. That's a pretty name. Where are your parents, Lily?" Her lower lip trembled. "Don't have any." Those 3 simple words hit Damien like a punch to the gut. "How long have you been out here?" Lily shrugged. "Don't know. A long time." Damien looked at her thin frame, the way she shivered in the cold. Something inside him, something he thought had died years ago, cracked open. "Would you like to come get something to eat?" he asked. "There's a diner right around the corner. We can get pancakes." Her eyes lit up at the word pancakes, but she hesitated. "Sister Mary says not to go with strangers." "Sister Mary? From the orphanage?" Lily nodded. "I ran away. They were mean there." Damien's heart clenched. He thought of his own childhood in foster homes, before he'd aged out of the system. The cold beds, the empty stomachs, the feeling that no one in the world cared if you lived or died. "I understand," he said. "I grew up in places like that too. But I promise you can trust me. Look, we'll sit right by the window where everyone can see us. And if you don't feel safe, you can leave any time." Lily studied his face for a long moment. Then she crawled out of her box, standing on shaky legs. She was even smaller than he'd thought. Her clothes hung off her like rags on a scarecrow. Without thinking, Damien took off his coat and wrapped it around her. It was like putting a blanket on a kitten. "Thank you," she whispered. They walked to the diner, Lily staying just out of arm's reach. The waitress raised her eyebrows at the odd pair, the man in the $1,000 suit and the dirty little girl drowning in his coat. But one sharp look from Damien kept her from commenting. Lily ordered chocolate chip pancakes. When they arrived, she stared at the pile of food like she couldn't believe it was real. "Go ahead," Damien encouraged. "It's all for you." She ate like she was afraid someone would take the food away, hunched protectively over her plate. Damien ordered more pancakes, then eggs and bacon. He watched as color came back into her cheeks. "How old are you, Lily?" 8, she said between bites. "And how long were you at the orphanage?" "Since I was little. My mom died when I was a baby. Never knew my dad." Damien nodded. His own parents had died in a car crash when he was 6. He remembered how lost he'd felt, how scared. "The orphanage wasn't nice," Lily continued. "The big kids took my food, And Sister Mary hit us with a ruler when we were bad. Anger flared in Damien's chest. He'd heard stories about St. Agnes' Home for Children. The place should have been shut down years ago. You don't have to go back there, he heard himself say. Lily looked up, hope and fear warring in her eyes. Where else can I go? Damien knew he was crazy for even thinking it. He had no business taking care of a child. His life was about business deals and board meetings, not bedtime stories and homework. But looking at Lily's face, he couldn't bear the thought of her going back to that place, or worse, ending up dead in some alley. You could stay with me, he said. I have a big apartment with plenty of room. You'd have your own bedroom, new clothes, good food. You'd be safe. Really? Her voice was so small, so full of wonder, that it made his throat tight. Really, but we'd have to do it properly through the courts. Would you like that? Lily's eyes filled with tears. Nobody ever wanted me before. Damien reached across the table and took her tiny hand in his. Well, I want you. I promise if you come home with me, you'll never be alone again. As soon as he said the words, he knew they were true. This little girl had awakened something in him he thought was long dead, the ability to care, to love. They left the diner, hand in hand. Lily was still wrapped in his coat, and for the first time in years, Damien felt truly warm. He didn't know it then, but that night would change both their lives forever. In trying to save a little girl, Damien Lancaster would end up saving himself. The next morning, Damien woke up to the sound of quiet crying. He found Lily curled up on the couch where he'd left her the night before, wrapped in blankets and sobbing, in her sleep. Lily, he said gently, touching her shoulder. Wake up, sweetheart. You're safe. Her eyes flew open, wild with fear for a moment, before she remembered where she was. I thought it was all a dream, she whispered. No dream, Damien smiled. You're really here. He'd given her one of his t-shirts to sleep in. It hung down past her knees like a dress. Her dark hair was still tangled, her face still dirty, but her eyes were brighter than they'd been last night. Are you hungry? He asked. She nodded eagerly. Well, I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage cereal. Then we need to go shopping. You need clothes, shoes, everything. I never been shopping before, Lily said. Damien's heart squeezed. Such a simple thing, going shopping. But for this little girl, it was as foreign as flying to the moon. While Lily ate her cereal, Damien made some calls. First to his lawyer, explaining the situation and asking about emergency custody. Then to Nancy, cancelling all his meetings for the day. But sir, Nancy protested, the merger meeting can wait. Damien cut her off. Something more important has come up. He heard the shock in her silence. In 15 years, Damien Lancaster had never put anything ahead of business. Their first stop was a department store. Lily's eyes went wide at the racks of clothes, all the colors and choices. She touched everything tentatively, like she was afraid. It might disappear. Pick whatever you like, Damien told her. She chose simple things, jeans, t-shirts, a pink sweater that made her smile. But when they got to the dress section, she stopped in front of a white party dress with a big bow. It's pretty, she said softly. Try it on, Damien encouraged. In the dressing room, Lily twirled in front of the mirror. The dress was too big, hanging off her thin frame, but her face glowed. I look like a princess, she whispered. You are a princess, Damien said. And we'll get you that dress and any others you want. They bought shoes next. Sneakers for playing, shiny black shoes for special occasions. Then warm winter boots because snow was coming soon. At the toy store, Lily was overwhelmed. She'd never had a toy of her own before. Damien watched as she wandered the aisles, touching everything with wonder. She stopped in front of a stuffed elephant. It was grey and soft, with floppy ears and kind eyes. Would you like that? Damien asked. Lily nodded, hugging the elephant to her chest when he handed it to her. I'm going to name him Mr. Trunk, she declared. That's a perfect name. They were loading their purchases into the car when Damien's phone rang. It was his lawyer, Jonathan. I've started the paperwork, Jonathan said, but there's a problem. Single men rarely get approved for adoption, especially businessmen with no experience with children. The courts will probably send her back to the orphanage. No, Damien said, firmly watching Lily arrange Mr. Trunk carefully in the back seat. That's not an option. Figure something out. Well, Jonathan hesitated. There is one possibility, but you're not going to like it. Tell me, a ceremonial marriage. If you were married, your chances of keeping custody would increase dramatically. The courts prefer traditional family structures. Damien frowned. You want me to get married? To who? It doesn't have to be real, Jonathan explained. Just legal. I know several women who would do it for the right price. After the adoption is final, you can quietly divorce. You want me to buy a wife? I want you to do whatever it takes to keep that little girl. Unless you're having second thoughts, Damien looked at Lily again. She was singing softly to Mr. Trunk, a simple song about elephants that she must have learned at the orphanage. No second thoughts, he said. Send me the details. They spent the rest of the day setting up Lily's room. Damien had never used the second bedroom in his penthouse. It had been just another empty space, but now it was filling up with clothes and toys, coming alive with color and possibility. Is this really all mine? Lily asked, sitting on her new bed with its purple butterfly sheets. All yours, Damien assured her, and no one can take it away. That night, after tucking Lily in with Mr. Trunk, Damien sat in his office looking at the file Jonathan had sent. 3 women were willing to enter into a marriage of convenience. All had impressive credentials. All understood the arrangement. All would sign ironclad prenups. It felt wrong, like he was trying to buy a family. But when he thought about Lily going back to that orphanage, he knew he'd do whatever it took to prevent that. A small sound made him look up. Lily stood in the doorway in her new pajamas, tears on her face. What's wrong, sweetheart? I had a bad dream, she sniffled. Can I stay with you for a little while? Damien opened his arms, and she ran to him, climbing into his lap. She was so small, so trusting. How could anyone have thrown her away? You know what? He said, stroking her hair. I used to have bad dreams too when I was your age. Would you like to know what helped me? She nodded against his chest. I would. Imagine building a fort. A big, strong fort where nothing bad could get in. Want to build one? They used couch cushions and blankets, creating a cave in the living room. Damien found a flashlight, and they sat inside their fort telling stories until Lily fell asleep. Looking at her peaceful face, Damien made a decision. He wouldn't marry a stranger for convenience. Lily deserved better than that. She deserved a real family with real love. He would fight for her whatever it took, because somehow in just 2 days, this little girl had become his whole world. As he carried her back to her bed, Lily stirred slightly. Love you, Daddy, she mumbled in her sleep. Damien's heart stopped, then started again, fuller than it had ever been. I love you too, Princess, he whispered, and knew it was true. A week passed and Lily bloomed like a flower in the sun. Her cheeks filled out from regular meals. Her hair, now clean and brushed, shone like dark silk. She smiled more, laughed, more, and the fear in her eyes began to fade. But their peaceful routine was shattered one morning when Sister Mary from St. Agnes showed up at Damien's office. Mr. Lancaster, the nun said, her stern face set in disapproving lines. We need to discuss Lily Anderson. Damien's hands tightened on his desk. There's nothing to discuss. She's staying with me. That child is a ward of St. Agnes Home for children, Sister Mary said. You had no right to take her. I had every right to rescue her from the streets after she ran away from your so-called care, Damien shot back. Do you know where I found her? In a cardboard box, half frozen and starving. Sister Mary's face reddened. We provide adequate care for all our children. Adequate? Damien stood up, anger making his voice shake. Is that why she has nightmares about being hit with rulers? Why she hoards food in her room because she's afraid it will be taken away? Children often exaggerate. Get out, Damien cut her off. And if you try to take Lily away from me, I'll have my lawyers investigate every complaint ever made against your facility. Every bruise, every missing meal, every dollar of funding that didn't go where it was supposed to. Sister Mary's face went pale. You wouldn't dare. Try me. After she left, Damien called Jonathan. We need to speed up the custody process. They're going to try to take her back. I'm working on it, Jonathan said, but without a wife in the picture, there has to be another way. Well, there might be, but it's risky. We could try for emergency custody based on evidence of abuse at St. Agnes, but we'd need Lily to testify. Damien's heart sank. The thought of putting Lily through that, making her relive those memories. "Let me think about it," he said. That evening he came home to find Lily and Nancy baking cookies. His usually efficient secretary had flour in her hair and was laughing as Lily carefully placed chocolate chips on each cookie. "Mr. Lancaster." Lily ran to hug him, getting flour on his suit. He didn't care. "Nancy's teaching me to bake. I hope that's okay," Nancy said. "She was lonely after school and I thought, it's more than okay." Damien smiled. "Thank you, Nancy." He watched them together. The way Nancy helped Lily measure ingredients, how she praised each slightly lopsided cookie, the gentle way she fixed Lily's hair bow. An idea began to form in his mind. Later, after Lily was in bed, Damien asked Nancy to stay for a coffee. "How long have you worked for me, Nancy?" 15 years this March, she said. "And in all that time, have I ever asked you about your personal life?" Nancy smiled. "No, sir. You've been very focused on business. Tell me now. Are you married? Children?" "Divorced," she said. "No children, though I always wanted them. My ex-husband," she paused. "He wasn't a good man." Damien nodded. "Nancy, I'm going to ask you something crazy. You can say no and nothing will change between us, but I need your help." He explained the situation, the custody battle, Sister Mary's threats, Jonathan's suggestion about marriage. "You want to marry me?" Nancy's eyes went wide. "A real marriage?" Damien said quickly. "Not just for show. I've watched you with Lily today. You're wonderful with her. She needs a mother, and He hesitated. "I need a partner, someone I can trust. But you don't love me," Nancy said softly. "No," Damien admitted, "but I respect you. I trust you. And maybe love could grow." Nancy was quiet for a long time. "Can I think about it?" "Of course." The next morning, Nancy came into his office early. Her face was determined. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes? I'll marry you for Lily and maybe for us too." Damien felt something shift in his chest. Nancy had always been there, efficient and loyal. How had he never noticed her kind eyes, her gentle smile? "Thank you," he said softly. They planned a simple ceremony for the following weekend. But first, they had to tell Lily. That evening, they sat her down in the living room. Mr. Trunk was clutched tightly in her arms. "Lily," Damien said gently, "how would you feel if Nancy came to live with us?" Lily's eyes lit up. "Really? Like today with the cookies?" "Even better," Nancy smiled. "I would be here all the time. You see, your daddy and I are going to get married." Lily's face fell. But what about me? Will I have to leave?" "Never." Damien pulled her into his lap. "You're my daughter, Lily. Nothing will ever change that. Nancy isn't replacing you. She's joining our family, making it bigger, better. Like when you add extra chocolate chips to cookies," Lily asked. Nancy laughed. "Exactly like that." Lily thought for a moment, then reached out and took Nancy's hand. "Will you be my mommy?" Nancy's eyes filled with tears. "I would love to be your mommy." They hugged, all three of them together, and Damien felt that shift in his chest again. This wasn't the family he'd imagined, but maybe it was exactly the family they all needed. That night, after Lily was asleep, Damien found Nancy on the balcony, looking at the city lights. "Having second thoughts?" he asked. She turned to him, and in the soft light he saw something in her face he'd never noticed before, a quiet strength, a gentle beauty. "No," she said. "For the first time in my life, everything feels right." Took her hand, and they stood together in comfortable silence. Maybe Jonathan had been wrong. Maybe they didn't need a marriage of convenience. Maybe what they needed was right here, waiting to bloom like Lily had, with time, care, and love. The wedding was small and simple, held in the garden of Damien's penthouse. Lily wore her white party dress with the big bow, carrying a tiny bouquet of pink roses. Nancy wore a cream-colored dress she'd bought off the rack, but she glowed like a queen. "You look beautiful," Lily told her, adjusting her flower crown for the 10th time. So do you, sweetheart, Nancy smiled, hugging her soon-to-be daughter. Damien watched them together, his heart full. This wasn't how he'd planned things, but seeing them together felt right. Nancy had moved in 2 days ago, and already the penthouse felt more like a home. There were fresh flowers on the tables, home-cooked meals in the evening, and so much more laughter. The ceremony was about to begin when an unexpected guest arrived. "Mother?" Damien said in surprise. Margaret Lancaster stood in the doorway, elegant as always in her designer suit. She hadn't answered any of Damien's calls about the wedding or about Lily. "I had to see for myself," Margaret said, looking around with critical eyes. "My son marrying his secretary and adopting a street child. What would your father say?" Damien felt his jaw tighten. "Father's been gone for 20 years, and if you've come here to cause trouble, who's that?" Lily whispered loudly to Nancy, pointing at Margaret. Margaret's eyes fixed on Lily, widening slightly. The child's resemblance to a young Damien was striking. The same dark hair, the same determined chin. "I'm your grandmother," Margaret said. Stiffly, Lily's face lit up. "I never had a grandmother before." She ran to Margaret, hugging her legs before anyone could stop her. Margaret stood frozen, staring down at the little girl. Then slowly her hand came down to touch Lily's hair. "You're wearing a very pretty dress," Margaret said softly. "Daddy bought it for me," Lily beamed. "Do you want to see me twirl?" Without waiting for an answer, she spun in a circle, her dress floating around her like a cloud. Margaret's face softened just a fraction. "You look like a princess," she said. "That's what Daddy says too. Will you stay for the wedding?" Nancy made cake. Margaret looked at Damien, something uncertain in her eyes. He nodded slightly. "I suppose. I could stay for a little while," she said. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. Lily stood between Damien and Nancy, holding both their hands as they said their vows. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Lily cheered louder than anyone. At the small reception afterward, Margaret watched as Lily showed her new grandmother all her favorite things. Mr. Trunk, her butterfly sheets, the cookies she'd learned to make with Nancy. "She's quite something," Margaret said to Damien. "She is," he agreed. "She changed everything." "I see that." Margaret sipped her champagne. "You're different too, happier." "I am." "Your father would have been proud," Margaret said quietly. "Not of your business success, though that too, but of this, of you becoming the man he always hoped you'd be." Damien felt tears sting his eyes. "Thank you, Mother." Across the room, Nancy was dancing with Lily, both of them laughing as they twirled. His wife and daughter, his family. But their happiness was about to be tested. The next morning, Jonathan called with bad news. Sister Mary hadn't given up. She'd filed a complaint with Child Protective Services, claiming Damien had kidnapped Lily. "They're sending someone to investigate," Jonathan warned. "Tomorrow morning." Damien felt cold fear in his stomach. "But we're married now, we're a proper family. It's not that simple. The marriage looks suspicious, too convenient, too quick. And there's still the matter of how you found Lily. Technically, you should have reported her to the authorities immediately." She was terrified. "I couldn't send her back to that place." "I understand," Jonathan said gently. "But the law has procedures. The investigator will want to interview all of you, including Lily. They'll check the house, your backgrounds, everything." That night, after Lily was asleep, Damien and Nancy sat on the balcony discussing their options. "Maybe we should tell them the truth," Nancy suggested. "About why I really married you." "No," Damien said firmly. "That would only make things worse." He took her hand. "Besides, it's not the whole truth anymore, is it?" Nancy looked at him, her eyes soft in the moonlight. "No, it's not. They had married for Lily's sake. But something else was growing between them. Something unexpected and precious. Their moment was interrupted by a scream from Lily's room. They rushed in to find her thrashing in her bed, caught in another nightmare. "No, please," she cried. "Don't take me away." "Shh, baby, we're here." Nancy gathered Lily in her arms while Damien sat beside them, stroking Lily's hair. "I don't want to go back," Lily sobbed. "Please don't let them take me." "Never," Damien promised. "You're our daughter now. Nothing, and no one will ever change that." They stayed with her until she fell asleep again, clutching Mr. Trunk and both their hands. "We'll fight them," Nancy said quietly. "Whatever it takes." Damien nodded. He'd built his business empire from nothing, facing down competitors and critics, but this was different. This was about love, about family, about a little girl who had already lost too much. Tomorrow the investigators would come. They would have to prove that their unusual family was real, that their love was genuine, and somehow they would have to protect Lily from reliving the traumas of her past. Looking at his sleeping daughter, Damien made a silent vow. He would move heaven and earth to keep his family together, because some things were worth fighting for, and this was everything. The Child Protective Services investigator arrived exactly at 9 the next morning. Her name was Ms. Roberts, and her face was as grey and serious as her suit. "I'll need to speak with each of you separately," she said, setting up her laptop on the dining room table, starting with the child. Damien felt Lily grip his hand tighter. "I want to stay with Daddy," she whispered. Ms. Roberts shook her head. "I need to speak with Lily alone. It's procedure." Nancy knelt down beside Lily. "Remember what we talked about, sweetheart. Just tell the truth. We'll be right outside." Lily nodded bravely, though her lower lip trembled. Mr. Trunk was clutched tightly to her chest as she sat down across from Ms. Roberts. Waiting in the hallway, Damien and Nancy could hear Lily's small voice answering questions. Every now and then her voice would crack, and Damien had to fight the urge to burst back in. "What happened at St. Agnes that made you run away?" they heard Ms. Roberts ask. "They were mean," Lily said. "Sister Mary hit us when we were bad, and the big kids took my food. Did you tell anyone?" "Nobody listened. They said I was making things up." There was a pause. Then Ms. Roberts asked, "And how did you meet Mr. Lancaster?" "Daddy found me when I was hiding in a box. He bought me pancakes and gave me his coat because I was cold. Nobody ever did nice things for me before, and now you live here with him and your new mother. Nancy's the best mommy ever." Lily's voice brightened. "She teaches me to bake cookies and reads me stories and checks under my bed for monsters. And when I have bad dreams, she and Daddy both come and make me feel safe." After what felt like hours, Ms. Roberts called Nancy in next. Damien hugged Lily close as Nancy went in for her interview. "Did I do good, Daddy?" Lily asked. "You did perfect, Princess." Inside, Ms. Roberts was reviewing Nancy's background. "You were Mr. Lancaster's secretary for 15 years before your sudden marriage. That doesn't strike you as unusual?" Nancy sat straight in her chair. "Love isn't always sudden, Ms. Roberts. Sometimes it grows slowly, day by day, until something makes you finally see what's been there all along. And that something was a homeless child who needed 2 parents for a legal adoption. That something was seeing the man I'd known for 15 years open his heart to a little girl who needed him, seeing him become the father he was always meant to be." Nancy's voice was firm. "Lily showed us both what we could be, not just successful or efficient, but truly happy." When it was Damien's turn, Ms. Roberts didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Mr. Lancaster, your mother-in-law from St. Agnes claims you kidnapped Lily." "I saved her," Damien corrected. "She was living in a cardboard box, hungry and afraid. Should I have left her there? You should have contacted the authorities, so they could send her back to be abused. I made a choice that night, to protect a child who needed me. Everything else, including this investigation, came second to keeping her safe." Ms. Roberts typed something on her laptop. "Your marriage to Nancy Thompson seems very convenient." "Nothing about love is convenient," Damien said. "Nancy and I built something real, something that started with caring for Lily but grew into so much more. We're a family, a rather unconventional one. The best ones usually are." After the interviews, Ms. Roberts asked to see Lily's room. She examined everything. The clothes in the closet, the toys on the shelves, the drawings stuck to the walls. She paid special attention to a family portrait Lily had drawn, showing her holding hands with Damien and Nancy under a smiling sun. "I have to make my report," Ms. Roberts said finally. "The court will make the final decision about custody." As she packed up her things, Lily suddenly ran to her. "Please don't take me away," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "They love me. Nobody ever loved me before." Ms. Roberts paused, looking down at Lily's pleading face. For the first time, her professional mask cracked slightly. "I'll include everything I've seen in my report," she said softly. Then, glancing at Damien and Nancy, she added, "All of it." After she left, the three of them held each other tight. "What happens now?" Lily asked. "Now we wait," Damien said. "But whatever happens, we're in this together." That night, none of them wanted to be apart. They built another fort in the living room, bigger than the first one, with all of Lily's favorite blankets and pillows. "Tell me a story," Lily said, snuggled between them. "Once upon a time," Nancy began, "there was a very lonely king who lived in a tall tower." "Like Daddy's office?" Lily interrupted. "Just like that. He had everything money could buy, but his heart was empty. Until one day, he found a little princess who needed a home, and a queen who'd been there all along," Damien added softly, taking Nancy's hand. They fell asleep there in the fort, a family bound not by blood but by something stronger: love, trust, and the fierce determination to stay together. The next morning, Margaret Lancaster arrived unannounced again. But this time she carried a thick folder. "I've been doing some research on St. Agnes," she said, "and I found something that might help." She spread documents across the dining room table: financial records, complaint reports, medical records. "Sister Mary has been embezzling funds meant for the children's care," Margaret explained, "and I have proof. If she continues to fight for custody of Lily, these documents will find their way to the police and the church authorities." Damien stared at his mother in amazement. "You did all this?" Margaret sniffed. "No one threatens my granddaughter." Lily, who had been listening from the doorway, ran to hug Margaret. This time Margaret hugged back without hesitation. "See?" Lily said. "I told you having a grandmother was the best." Margaret's eyes met Damien's over Lily's head. In them he saw not just the stern society woman who had raised him, but a mother who would fight just as fiercely for her family as he would. "Thank you, Mother," he said softly. Margaret nodded, smoothing Lily's hair. "Family protects family. It's what we do." A week after Margaret's visit, Sister Mary showed up at Lancaster Industries. She wasn't alone. "This is Father Thomas from the diocese," she said, gesturing to the elderly priest beside her. "We need to discuss the accusations you've made." Damien leaned back in his chair, keeping his face calm though his heart was racing. "I haven't made any accusations yet. These documents your mother uncovered," Sister Mary's voice shook with anger. "They're lies." "The church takes these matters very seriously," Father Thomas said quietly. "Financial misconduct, child neglect, these are grave charges." "I have proof," Damien said. "Bank records, witness statements, medical reports of children who were in your care." Sister Mary's face went red. "You're trying to blackmail me." "No," Damien stood up. "I'm trying to protect my daughter and every other child in your care, Mr. Lancaster." Father Thomas raised his hand. "Perhaps we can find a solution that serves everyone's interests." "I'm listening." "If Sister Mary withdraws her complaint about Lily's custody, would you be willing to keep these documents private?" Damien shook his head. "Not good enough. I want St. Agnes investigated. I want changes made. No other child should suffer what Lily did." Father Thomas nodded slowly. "That seems reasonable." "Father," Sister Mary protested. "Enough, sister." Father Thomas's voice was gentle but firm. "Perhaps it's time for you to consider retirement. The church can handle the investigation internally." Sister Mary's shoulders slumped in defeat. "What about the girl?" "Lily stays with us," Damien said. "That's not negotiable." After they left, Damien called Nancy with the news. "It's over. They're dropping the custody challenge. Thank God," Nancy breathed. "Lily will be so happy. She's been having nightmares again." "How is she today?" "Better. Your mother took her shopping for school supplies. Can you believe it? Margaret Lancaster, buying crayons and lunchboxes." Damien smiled, remembering how his mother had changed since meeting Lily. The Ice Queen was melting, one crayon at a time. But their celebration was premature. That afternoon, Jonathan called with troubling news. "Someone's been asking questions about Nancy's past," he said, "specifically about her ex-husband." Damien felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of questions?" The dangerous kind. I think he's found her. Nancy had never talked much about her ex-husband, Tom Walsh. Damien only knew he'd been abusive, that Nancy had fled in the night with just the clothes on her back. When he got home that evening, he found Nancy in the kitchen, helping. Lily with homework. They looked so peaceful, so happy. The thought of someone threatening that peace made his blood boil. "Nancy," he said after Lily went to bed, "we need to talk about Tom." She went pale. "How do you know about Tom?" Jonathan called. "He's been asking about you." Nancy sank into a chair, trembling. "He can't find me, he can't." Damien took her hands in his. They were ice cold. "Tell me everything." The story came out in broken pieces. The beatings, the threats, the way Tom had controlled every aspect of her life. She'd changed her name, moved across the country, built a new life. "That's why I became your secretary," she admitted. "You were powerful, successful. I thought I'd be safe." "You are safe," Damien pulled her close. "I won't let him hurt you." "You don't know him," Nancy whispered. "He's crazy. If he finds out about Lily..." "Listen to me." Damien cupped her face in his hands. "You're my wife, Lily's mother. We'll protect you, just like you've protected us." A small voice came from the doorway. "Mommy, are you crying?" Lily stood there in her butterfly pajamas, Mr. Trunk dragging behind her. Nancy quickly wiped her eyes. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just talking to Daddy." But Lily was too perceptive. She climbed into Nancy's lap, wrapping her small arms around her neck. "Don't be sad, Mommy. When I'm sad, you and Daddy make it better. Now we'll make you better." Nancy held Lily tight, fresh tears falling. "My brave girl, my precious, brave girl." Damien watched them, love and fierce protectiveness filling his chest. They were his family, his whole world, and he would move heaven and earth to keep them safe. The next morning, he called in every favor he had. Private investigators, security, firms, lawyers, anyone who could help protect his family. Margaret joined the effort, using her society connections to gather information about Tom Walsh's whereabouts. "He's in Boston," she reported, "but he's made travel arrangements to New York." "When?" "Next week." "Damien," she hesitated. "Be careful. The investigators found things, violent things. This man is dangerous." Damien nodded grimly. "I know, but so am I when it comes to protecting my family." That night, he found Nancy in Lily's room, watching their daughter sleep. "I can't lose this," Nancy whispered. "I can't lose her, or you." Damien wrapped his arms around her from behind. "You won't. We've faced Sister Mary, Child Services, society's judgment, and we're still here. We'll face this too. Together." Nancy turned in his arms. "Together," he promised, and kissed her softly. They had married for convenience, for Lily's sake, but somewhere along the way it had become real, deep and true and worth fighting for. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars. Inside, a family held each other close, finding strength in their love as they prepared to face whatever storms were coming. Because that's what families do. They face the darkness together and help each other find the light. A bouquet of red roses arrived at Lancaster Industries the next morning. There was no card, but Nancy's hands shook as she looked at them. "He always sent red roses," she whispered, before the bad things would happen." Damien immediately called security. "I want the delivery traced, and double the guards at the building entrance." But Tom Walsh was clever. The flowers had been ordered online, paid with a prepaid card. Another bouquet arrived at their home that afternoon. "How did he find our address?" Nancy paced the living room. "I've been so careful." "We should go away for a while," Damien suggested. "I have a house in the Hamptons, somewhere safe until we can deal with him." Nancy shook her head. "Running didn't solve anything last time. He just kept finding me." Lily came home from school, then bubbling with excitement about an upcoming class play. "I'm going to be a princess," she announced. "Can we go shopping for a costume?" Nancy forced a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. This weekend." But that night, after Lily was asleep, Nancy made a difficult decision. I have to leave, she told Damien. If I stay, he'll hurt you and Lily. I can't let that happen. No, Damien's voice was firm. We're not letting him tear this family apart. You don't understand, Nancy's voice cracked. Last time, when I tried, going to leave him, he put me in the hospital. The doctors said I almost died. Damien pulled her into his arms. That was when you were alone. You're not alone anymore. A small sound made them turn. Lily stood in the doorway, tears running down her face. Mommy's leaving, she asked in a tiny voice. No, baby, Nancy reached for her. I'm not leaving. I was just scared. But Daddy reminded me that we're stronger together. Lily climbed into their lap. Is it because of the bad man? I heard you talking. He hurt you before. Nancy stroked Lily's hair. A long time ago. But that's over now. Did he go to jail? No, sweetheart, he didn't. Lily's face set in a determined expression that looked just like Damien's. Then we have to put him in jail. That's where bad people go, out of the mouths of babes. Damien and Nancy looked at each other, realizing Lily was right. The next morning, Damien called Jonathan. I want to file charges against Tom Walsh. Everything we can make stick, assault, stalking, threats. It won't be easy, Jonathan warned. These cases often come down to he said, she said. Not this time, Margaret Lancaster swept into Damien's office carrying another folder. I found his other victims, 3 ex-girlfriends before Nancy, all with hospital records, police reports, restraining orders. Mother, how did you... I have my ways, Margaret sniffed. No one threatens my family. They brought the evidence to the district attorney. Pictures of Nancy's injuries from years ago, statements from other women, the recent stalking behavior. But before the DA could act, Tom made his move. It was a normal Tuesday. Nancy was picking Lily up from school just like always. As they walked to the car, a man stepped out from behind a tree. Hello, Nancy, he said softly. You're looking well. Nancy pushed Lily behind her. Tom? He looked older, grayer, but his eyes were the same, cold and angry. Didn't expect to find you playing happy families, a millionaire. Husband, a kid. You've done well for yourself. Leave us alone, Nancy's voice shook. Now, is that any way to talk to your real husband? You're not her husband, Lily shouted. My daddy is. Tom's face darkened. Shut up, you little... Step away from my family. Damien's voice cut through the tension. He stood at the school gate and he wasn't alone. 2 police officers flanked him. Mr. Walsh, one officer said, we have a warrant for your arrest. Tom's hand moved toward his pocket. You think this is over? She belongs to me. Everything happened fast then. Tom pulled out a knife. The officers drew their weapons. Lily screamed. But before anyone could move, a heavy purse swung through the air, catching Tom in the back of the head. He stumbled, dropping the knife. Margaret. Lancaster stood there, designer purse still raised. I knew those gold bars would come in handy, she said calmly. The officers tackled Tom, cuffing him as he shouted threats and curses. You okay? Damien gathered Nancy and Lily in his arms. We are now, Nancy said, watching as the police car drove away with Tom in the back. That night, they had a family meeting in their blanket fort. Mr. Trunk sat in the place of honor as they discussed what had happened. Is the bad man going to jail? Lily asked. Yes, Princess, Damien assured her. For a long time. Good. Lily hugged Nancy. Now Mommy doesn't have to be scared anymore. Nancy kissed her daughter's head. I'm not scared. You know why? Because I have the best family in the world protecting me. Don't forget Grandma, Lily giggled. She hit him with her purse like a superhero. They all laughed, even Margaret, who had insisted on staying over just in case. Later, after Lily was asleep in her own bed, Damien found Nancy on the balcony. Penny. For your thoughts, she smiled. I was just thinking about that first night when you found Lily. How scared and alone she was. How scared and alone I was for so many years. And now I know what real love feels like. What family feels like. She touched his face. I may have married you to help save Lily, but somewhere along the way, you saved us all, Damien finished, drawing her close. They stood together under the stars, stronger for having faced their demons, more in love for having fought their battles side by side. Inside, their daughter slept peacefully, no longer haunted by nightmares. Downstairs, security guards kept watch. ensuring no more unwanted visitors would threaten their peace, and in her guest room, Margaret Lancaster smiled as she checked the heavy gold bars in her purse. Just in case. Because that's what grandmothers, see they protect their own, with whatever weapons they have at hand. 3 months after Tom's arrest, life had settled into a new normal. The nightmares, both Lily's and Nancy's, came less frequently. The reporters had moved on to other stories. Even Margaret had reluctantly returned to her own home, though she still came for dinner 3 times a week. Then one morning, Lily asked a question that changed everything. "Can I have a baby brother?" Damien choked on his coffee. Nancy froze with a pancake halfway to Lily's plate. "What made you think about that?" Nancy asked carefully. "Jenny at school just got a baby brother," Lily said. "She says it's like having a real live doll. Please, I promise I'll help take care of it." Damien and Nancy exchanged looks. They hadn't discussed children. Their marriage had started as an arrangement, even though it had grown into real love. "A baby would be a huge step. We'll think about it," Damien said finally. But the idea had been planted. That night, after Lily was asleep, they talked. "I always wanted more children," Nancy admitted. "But after Tom, I was afraid to even dream about it. And now," she smiled, "now I'm not afraid anymore. But what about you? You never planned on having any children before Lily." "Lily changed everything," Damien said softly. "She showed me what I was missing. And seeing you with her, you're an amazing mother, Nancy." They decided to try, but after 6 months with no success, they consulted a doctor. The news wasn't good. "The injuries from your ex-husband," the doctor told Nancy gently. "They left a lot of internal scarring. Pregnancy would be very difficult, maybe impossible." Nancy cried all the way home. Damien held her hand, feeling helpless. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have told you before we married, about not being able, about being broken." "Hey," Damien stopped the car and turned to her. "You are not broken. You are the strongest, most beautiful person I know, and we already have a perfect family." But Nancy's sadness affected everyone. Lily noticed her mother's red eyes and quiet moods. "Did I make Mommy sad?" she asked Damien. "By asking for a brother?" "No, Princess. Mommy's just a little sad because sometimes grown-ups want things they can't have." Lily thought about this. The next day she came home from school with a drawing. It showed their family. Damien, Nancy, Lily, Margaret and Mr. Trunk all holding hands. "See?" she explained. "We don't need a baby. We already have the best family." Nancy hugged her daughter tight, crying again but with a smile this time. That weekend, Margaret invited them all to her country house. As they walked in the garden, she had a suggestion. "Have you considered adoption? There are so many children who need homes. Children like Lily." Nancy and Damien looked at each other. They hadn't thought about it. "The system is broken," Damien said. "We saw that with Lily and St. Agnes. So fix it," Margaret said simply. "You have the money, the influence. Instead of fighting the system, change it." The idea took root. Over the next few weeks, Damien researched everything he could about the foster care system. He talked to experts, studied successful programs in other countries. Then he called a board meeting at Lancaster Industries. "I want to start a new division," he announced. "The Lancaster Foundation for Children. We'll work to reform the foster care system, support adoptive families, and make sure what happened at St. Agnes never happens again." The board members shifted. Uncomfortably. This wasn't their usual type of business venture. "It won't make money," one director warned. "Not everything is about money," Damien replied. "Sometimes it's about doing what's right." The foundation's first project was rebuilding St. Agnes with new staff and new policies. Sister Mary's replacement was a kind woman named Sister Helen, who believed in hugs instead of rulers. They also started a program to help foster children aging out of the system, providing college scholarships, job training, and support. One day while visiting the new St. Agnes, Nancy met a teenage girl named Maria. She was 15, angry and defensive, just like Nancy had been at that age. "Nobody wants to adopt teenagers," Maria said bitterly. "We're too old, too damaged." Nancy looked at this girl who reminded her so much of herself. "Would you like to come have dinner with my family?" Maria shrugged, trying to act like she didn't care. "Whatever." But at dinner, something magical happened. Lily immediately adopted Maria as her big sister, showing her all her toys and drawings. Margaret taught her how to properly hold a soup spoon, treating her like a lady instead of a troublemaker. Damien asked about her interests and actually listened to her answers, and Nancy saw the scared little girl behind Maria's tough facade. That night, after Maria went back to St. Agnes, they had another family meeting in the fort. "Can Maria be my sister?" Lily asked. "She needs a family too." Damien looked at Nancy. "What do you think?" "I think our family has room for one more," Nancy smiled. The adoption process was easier this time, with the Lancaster Foundation's support. Maria moved in 2 weeks later. At first she was wary, waiting for the other shoe to drop, but slowly she began to trust, to smile, to belong. One evening, Damien came home to find Maria helping Lily with her homework while Nancy made dinner, and Margaret set the table with her best china because family dinners should be special. His heart felt so full it might burst. This was what real wealth looked like. Not the money in his accounts or the company's success, but the love that filled every corner of their home. "Daddy," Lily ran to hug him. "Maria taught me fractions today, and Mommy says we can get a dog." "A dog?" He looked at Nancy. She shrugged, smiling. "Well, why not? Our family seems to keep growing anyway." And that was the real miracle. Their family had started with a lonely businessman and a little girl in a cardboard box. It had grown to include a secretary who became so much more, a grandmother who learned to love again, and now a teenager who needed them as much as they needed her. It wasn't the family any of them had expected. But it was perfect, just the way it was. The dog they adopted was a scruffy mutt from the shelter, with one ear that flopped and another that stood straight up. Lily named him Hero because, as she explained, he's going to protect our family just like we protect each other. Maria was the one who found him, volunteering at the shelter as part of her community service hours for school. The moment Hero put his head in her lap, she knew he was meant to be theirs. "He's kind of broken," she told Damien. "Nobody wanted him because he's not perfect, but he's perfect for us." Damien looked at the dog, who was missing part of his tail and had a scar over one eye. He thought about his family, all of them carrying scars, all of them healing together. "You're right," he said. "He's exactly what we need." Hero fit right in, sleeping at the foot of Lily's bed and following Maria around like a shadow. He even won over Margaret, despite her initial concerns about dog hair on her designer clothes. "Well," she sniffed, scratching behind Hero's ears, "at least he has good taste. He knows quality when he sees it." Life settled into a new rhythm. Mornings were chaos, with everyone getting ready for school and work. Maria had her first boyfriend, which gave Damien grey hairs, and Nancy plenty of opportunities to share mother-daughter talks. Lily was excelling in school, especially in art class where her family portraits now included Hero. The Lancaster Foundation was making real changes in the foster care system. More families were adopting older children, inspired by Maria's story. The new St. Agnes became a model for other homes, with Sister Helen's loving approach changing lives. But their happiness faced a new test when Maria's biological father suddenly appeared. He showed up at her school one day, a man named Carlos Rodriguez, who had spent the last 10 years in prison. "She's my daughter," he told the principal. "I have rights." Maria came home that day shaking. "I don't want to see him. I don't want anything to do with him." "You don't have to," Nancy assured her, holding her close. But Carlos was persistent. He hired a lawyer claiming he wanted to make amends. "I've changed," he told Damien when they met. "I want to know my daughter." Damien studied the man across his desk. He saw genuine regret there, but also something else. Desperation. "This isn't about Maria, is it?" Damien asked. "What do you really want?" Carlos slumped in his chair. "I'm in trouble. I owe some bad people money. I thought, maybe, you thought I'd pay you off to stay away from her. Wouldn't you? To protect your family?" Damien leaned forward. "Yes, I would. But that's not what's going to happen here. Instead, I'm going to make you an offer." He laid out his proposal. The Lancaster Foundation would help Carlos, job training, counseling, a fresh start. But there were conditions. "You'll stay away from Maria until she's ready to see you. If that's never, you'll respect her choice and you'll get clean, stay clean and make something of yourself. Why would you help me? Because you're part of Maria's story, even if you're not part of her life right now. And because everyone deserves a second chance. When Damien told Maria about the arrangement, she was quiet for a long time. You're not mad that I don't want to see him? No, sweetheart. Family is about love, not blood. You choose who you want. In your life, Maria hugged him tight. I already have the best dad in the world. That night they had a celebration. Not for any special reason, just because they were together. Nancy and Lily baked cookies. Maria taught Margaret to play video games, which was hilarious to watch. Hero chased his tail and barked at squirrels through the window. Damien sat back, watching his family with a full heart. 2 years ago, he had been a lonely man focused only on making money. Now he had more love in his life than he'd ever dreamed possible. The Lancaster Foundation was growing too. They'd opened a new center for teenage mothers, giving them support and education instead of judgment. Nancy ran it, understanding better than most what it meant to need a fresh start. One day, a young woman came in holding a baby and looking terrified. I can't do this, she told Nancy. I'm not good enough. Nancy thought of her own journey, from an abused wife to a beloved mother of 2. None of us start out good enough, she said. We learn, we grow, and we don't do it alone. The woman stayed. Others came. The center became a place of hope and second chances. Margaret started volunteering there, surprising everyone, including herself. These girls need someone to teach them proper manners, she explained. But they all saw how she softened around the babies, how she slipped extra money into the emergency fund, how she fought like a tiger when anyone dared to judge her girls. One evening, as they sat in their usual family fort, now big enough for 2 teenagers, 2 adults, 1 grandmother, 1 dog, and Mr. Trunk, Lily made an announcement. I want to help kids too when I grow up, like we helped Maria. And like you helped me, Maria added, hugging her little sister. Nancy looked at Damien, tears in her eyes. Their daughter, who had started with nothing, was dreaming of giving to others. You know what, Damien said. I think that's the best idea I've ever heard. Hero barked in agreement, making them all laugh. Outside, the city lights twinkled as always, but inside their home something magical had happened. A family born of chance and choice had become something extraordinary, a beacon of hope for others who needed to believe in second chances and happy endings. Because sometimes the best families aren't the ones we're born into, but the ones we build together, one act of love at a time. 5 years had passed since the night Damien found Lily in that cardboard box. The Lancaster Foundation was celebrating its 4th anniversary with a special gala at the newly renovated St. Agnes Home for Children. Are you nervous about your speech? Nancy asked Lily, now 13, as she helped her with her dress. A little, Lily admitted, but Maria helped me practice. Maria, now 20 and in her 2nd year of college, was studying social work. She lived in a dorm but came home every weekend, claiming it was for Nancy's cooking but really because she missed her family. You'll do great, Squirt, Maria said, adjusting her own dress. Just speak from your heart. The gala was packed. Former foster children who'd found homes through the foundation, families who'd adopted, donors who'd supported their work. Even Carlos Rodriguez was there, clean and sober for 3 years, working as a counselor for troubled teens. Maria still wasn't ready for a relationship with him, but they'd exchanged letters. Small steps, Nancy called it. Healing takes time. Hero lay under the buffet table in a bow tie, sneaking treats from children who found his mismatched ears charming. Margaret, elegant as ever in her designer gown, pretended not to notice. 5 years ago, Lily began her speech, standing tall at the podium. I was a scared little girl living in a box. I didn't have a family or hope or even enough food to eat. But then my daddy found me and everything changed. She looked at Damien, who felt tears in his eyes. But my story isn't just about me. It's about my mom, Nancy, who taught me that love can heal any hurt. About my sister, Maria, who showed me that family isn't about where you come from, but where you belong. About my grandma, Margaret, who learned that sometimes the best things in life come with a little dog hair. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. The Lancaster Foundation isn't just about finding homes for children. It's about building families, real families, made up of love and trust and second chances. Sometimes those families look different from what people expect. Sometimes they have two mums or two dads. Sometimes they have grandparents raising grandchildren. Sometimes they're built one piece at a time, like a puzzle finding its missing parts. She held up Mr. Trunk, a little worn now but still beloved. This elephant was my first gift in my new family. I was afraid to believe it was real, that I could keep him, but my daddy promised me that love, once given, is forever, and he was right. In the audience, Sister Helen hugged a teenage girl who was just starting her own journey. Carlos wiped tears from his eyes, thinking of lost years and new beginnings. Couples who'd adopted through the foundation held hands, remembering their own stories. Today, we're not just celebrating the foundation's success, we're celebrating every child who's found a home, every parent who's opened their heart, every family that's been built on choice instead of chance. Damien stood with his arm around Nancy, watching their daughter shine. Who would have thought that one act of kindness on a cold night would lead to all this? After the speech, as people mingled and shared stories, a small boy tugged on Damien's sleeve. "Are you the man who helps kids find families?" he asked. Damien knelt down to his level. "My whole family helps with that. Would you like to meet them?" The boy nodded shyly. "I'm Jacob," he whispered. "I just came to St. Agnes yesterday. Sister Helen says I might find a forever family like Lily did." "You will," Damien promised. "Want to know a secret? The best families are the ones that find each other exactly when they need to." Later that night, they all gathered in the fort, a tradition they'd never outgrown. Maria was home for the weekend. Margaret had kicked off her designer shoes to sit on the floor. Hero dozed with his head in Lily's lap while she did her homework. "I've been thinking," Nancy said softly to Damien. "About Jacob." He smiled. "Me too. Our family has room for one more, doesn't it?" "Always," Damien kissed her. "That's what families do. They grow." Lily looked up from her books. "Are we getting another brother?" Maria grinned. "Better hide your toys, Squirt." "I'll have to redecorate another room," Margaret mused. "Perhaps a sports theme this time." They all laughed, but there were happy tears, too, because that's what real love does. It multiplies. It grows. It reaches out to others who need it. The next morning, Damien stood at his office window, just like he had that night 5 years ago. But now, instead of seeing his own reflection, he saw the future, bright and full of possibilities. His phone buzzed, a text from Nancy. "Sister Helen says Jacob loves dogs." He smiled, thinking of the little boy who'd tugged his sleeve. Another, a piece of their family puzzle waiting to fit into place. Outside, the city was waking up. Somewhere, a child was waiting for a home. Somewhere, a family was waiting to be built. And in a penthouse with a blanket fort in the living room, a businessman who once thought he had everything was getting ready to open his heart again, because that's what love does. It changes everything, forever.